Welcome to Highland Waves, a podcast originating from Marshbrook Studios, located on a bank of the world-renowned Margaree River in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, Canada. Highland Waves feature stories about the people, the places, and those who come to visit us here in Inverness County. I'm Pat Wall, your host. This afternoon's podcast is devoted to an important topic that we first spoke about in episode 9, session 5. The proposed electrical boundary changes coming for Inverness County. The commission that will make recommendations on those changes will deliver its report to the Nova Scotia government on January the 30th, 2026, 2 days from now. Their recommendations, if accepted by government, could significantly affect political representation in a large segment of northern Inverness County following the next provincial election. To review and bring listeners up to date on the issue, I'm pleased to have with me in studio Mr. Marcel Deveaux, a resident of Belcote, Inverness County, and perhaps the most knowledgeable individual on this subject in the county. Welcome to Highland Waves, Marcel.
Thank you.
Marcel, before we get into the question and answer segment of this podcast, I will now set the stage somewhat for our listeners. Nova Scotia is divided into 55 political districts. For fairness, they are all supposed to have the same number of voters. This is referred to as voter parity. However, smaller districts can be created to give minority populations a stronger voice. That is, to give them more effective representation in the legislature. Every 10 years or so, an Electoral Boundaries Commission is established by government to review all provincial districts in Nova Scotia to ensure they are the correct size and to consider issues of effective representation. The 2019 Electoral Boundaries Commission recommended that special protected districts for Argyll, Clare and Richmond in Nova Scotia can be created despite them having only one-half the number of voters that they should have. This was done to increase the effective representation of the Acadian populations in those districts. That commission did not formally consider Shettycamp for special protected status because it would have only 1/5 or 20% of the required number of voters, too small to be an electoral district. The Acadian Federation and a Shettycamp committee challenged that decision in court. The judge ruled in their favour. He ruled that the commission should have formally considered Shettycamp for the creation of a special protected district. He further ruled that the government had to create a new Electoral Boundaries Commission to formally consider if Shettycamp should be considered, and if so, what the boundaries should be. Apparently, to boost their numbers and strengthen their case, the proponents, the Acadian Federation and the Shettycamp Committee, on their own, included Margaree and Pleasant Bay in their proposed new district. Evidently, however, they did not in any way or any time confer with the residents of Margaree or Pleasant Bay to inform them of their action. The new Electoral Boundaries Commission began their work in the spring of 2025. But the people of Margaree and Pleasant Bay apparently only learned about the Commission's work by accident and very late in the process. They feel this put them at an unfair advantage compared to the proponents from Shettycamp in presenting their arguments at the Commission's public hearings. The options being considered by the current Boundary Commission are as follows. A district to include Pleasant Bay, Shettycamp and south to Doyle's Bridge in Margaree Forks. 2. A district to include Pleasant Bay, Shettycamp and all of the Margarees. And 3. The status quo, which encompasses from Meat Cove to Port Hawkesbury. Marcel, you've obviously studied previous decisions regarding this type of process. What motivated you to become involved in this current Boundary Commission process in Inverness County?
In July of last year, I learned, by accident, that an Electoral Boundaries Commission was holding hearings about cutting off a portion of Inverness County to create a new provincial district centred on Shettycamp that would include Pleasant Bay and Margaree. I also found out that the only people who knew about this were the people who were pushing for it pushing for the new district. So when I realized that the people of Pleasant Bay and Margaree were in the dark about it, I made it my business to set out and inform them that this was happening.
My understanding is that you and many others in the Margaree and Pleasant Bay area are against this district for Shettycamp and area. Is that correct?
Thank you for asking that question. The people in Pleasant Bay and Margaree are not opposed to Shettycamp having its own district. What we're saying is that if Shettycamp has its own district, Margaree and Pleasant Bay do not want to be a part of it.
Okay. Why do Pleasant Bay and Margaree not want to be part of a Shettycamp and area district?
Well, there's so many reasons. We could spend a whole podcast on that. However, our overriding concern is that we know from experience that we would not be well represented in an undersized provincial district that is dominated by Shettycamp. This committee and the Acadian Federation have been pursuing this electoral district that includes Pleasant Bay and Margaree for over 30 years, and not once in that time, never did they ask for Pleasant Bay's input or Margaree's input, or even told us that they were doing this. We're being included because they need our numbers, not because they want to represent us. So we feel that if we were part of this new district, our issues and concerns would not be their priorities.
Okay. So there is a process underway to determine if Shettycamp and area district should be created. Where does the process stand now?
Well, the effort's been going on since the 1990s, but for our purposes here, it really began with the release of the 2019 Electoral Boundaries Commission final report. That was one of the 10-year review commissions. The report recommended, as you noted, that special protected districts be created for the Acadian communities of Argyll, Clare, and Richmond. The districts are only one half the size that they should be, which is a voter parity of 0.5, but because they had a significant minority Acadian populations, the government agreed that the districts should be created to give the Acadian populations there a fair chance of electing an Acadian MLA, which would increase their effective representation. In their interim report, the Boundaries Commission said they looked at Shettycamp, but it was too small to be formally considered for a district, so they didn't mention it in their final report. So that was 2019. In 2023, the Acadian Federation, along with some individuals from Shettycamp, sued the government, saying that failure to create a special protected district interfered with their right to vote. The court ruled in their favor, as you said, and they said that the Commission erred in not formally considering Shettycamp for a special protected district. The court did not say that Shettycamp should have its own district. That's not the court's responsibility. It just said that the 2019 Commission should have formally considered Shettycamp for its own district based on the criteria of voter parity and effective representation. So in the spring of 2025, the government formed a new commission, the 2025 Electoral Boundaries Commission, specifically to decide if Shettycamp and area, if a Shettycamp and area district should be created, and if so, what the boundaries would be. In 2025, the Commission held preliminary hearings in July to explain what they were considering and get public feedback. They released an interim report in August and held a second round of hearings in October. Their final report is due to be released on January 30th.
It seems to be an issue of this importance to constituents of a district would seem to be important enough to trigger a communication strategy by government directed to individual voting age constituents to ensure they were aware of the situation and enable them to prepare their responses. In your opinion, do you think the communication strategy was adequate and fair?
Clearly it was not. The first of the July hearings was held in Port Hawkesbury. No one attended that. The next hearing was in Inverness, and it was well attended by the proponents of the new district, but the fact that no other affected resident of the district, except myself, my wife, and one other person attended, proves this. The other person that was there had been active in politics in the area and only had a technical question about the process. Now, the Commission stated in their interim report that they had advertised the hearings, and I believe them, but I haven't spoken to anyone who's seen or heard any such ad. They advertised the hearings, but it clearly wasn't effective. For example, an ad that says there will be an Electoral Boundaries Commission meeting at some location will not mean anything to anyone that doesn't know that the process is going on or what it is about. So no one would react to it. Only the proponents knew that the process was going on, and they're the ones that would recognize the ad and know what it was about.
Okay. You say that the July hearings were not effectively advertised. Do you think the Commission was able to achieve its purpose of presenting and explaining options and receiving community feedback?
Well, the Commission did not provide any information to or hear from the people of Margaree or Pleasant Bay during the July hearings. On the other hand, the Sheddycamp hearing was well attended by the proponents, and it was carefully choreographed. It was clear that they had been planning these hearings for a very long time. The first speaker was the president of the Acadian Federation. The closing speaker was the president of La Société Saint-Pierre, which is the group that runs the Les Tropignons. And Senator O'Coin, who is the leading proponent of this district, spoke at length, as did most of the other proponents of the new district. But this wasn't a groundswell of popular opinion. These presenters were mainly the same group of ardent Acadians who have been pushing for the new district for years. And they did not make known that they were the presidents of the they didn't make known their affiliations, that they were presidents of the associations and the same people who launched the court case and who argued it.
What took place after the July hearings?
Well, after those hearings, say this would be about 4 days after I first learned that this was going on, I contacted some community leaders in Margaree and Pleasant Bay. I explained to them what was going on, and I provided them with as much information as I could and asked them to help me get their communities engaged in the process. In Margaree, we did this through several public information sessions. In Pleasant Bay, we did it largely with Facebook posts, phone calls, and emails. In both communities, the people were shocked to learn that all of this was going on without their knowledge.
What was the response from the people of Pleasant Bay and Margaree when they learned about the Commission's work?
The response was enormous. The people from Pleasant Bay made a disproportionately large number of written submissions to the Commission. They provided a paper petition that was signed by 70 voters out of the total 200 residents of Pleasant Bay, and an online petition with 266 signatures of current and former residents. And all of this was accomplished at absolutely the last minute, as they were the last to learn about this proposal. The people of Margaree were strongly committed and really forthright in making their concerns known. They made a disproportionately large number of written submissions as well, and also many oral submissions to the Commission. In fact, at the October hearing in Margaree Forks, there were more attendees present there than in the Sheddycamp hearing, despite the fact that Sheddycamp has a much larger population. And the Commission never did meet in person with the voters of Pleasant Bay.
An interim report was made public at the end of August. What did it contain?
The interim report, it contained background information about the electoral boundaries process. It contained a synopsis of what the Commission heard from the public in the July hearings, with an acknowledgement that, quote, the presenters may not have been representative of the population affected, close quote. This was their acknowledgement that Pleasant Bay and Margaree were kept in the dark at that point. The interim report explained the three options that were under consideration, and they were slightly different than the first options, the options that were made at the beginning of the process. And now the interim report, along with a huge amount of information, can be found at the Commission's webpage. It has maps and voter data for each option, and all of the written and oral submissions that were made to the Commission are printed there. I'll give you the URL, but before that, an easy way to find it is on a post, a Facebook post that you'll find on Margaree Neighbours Helping Neighbours. We put that there as a reminder to the people that this is coming up, this report is coming up, and the links are there. You could also find it on Pleasant Bay Community Hall Facebook group. It has the links as well as plus a lot of other information. The URL is www. Now all one word is NS Electoral Boundaries Commission 2025.ca/. I don't know if you need the /. So that's www.ns Electoral Boundaries Commission 2025.ca.
So the Commission outlined 3 options for a new district for the constituents to consider. They were presented earlier, but let's cover each one here, its pros and cons. Number 1, the status quo.
Okay, the status quo, Inverness would be unchanged. The district would be unchanged. The downside is the district would probably never have an Acadian MLA just due to the distribution of people in the district. Shettycamp, on the other hand, Shettycamp, Margaree, Pleasant Bay, and other villages in the district would all be on the same, have a more or less equal footing when pursuing government services. All of our districts have been reasonably well served in the past, and this would go on, and so there'd be a sense of fairness there. The second, Pleasant Bay to Doyle's Bridge, this is the preferred option for the Shettycamp Committee. They would almost certainly elect an Acadian MLA, and because of the small size of the district, their voters would have 5 times the voting power of the average district. Excuse me. That's kind of esoteric and philosophical, but that would be an advantage to them. But this is the worst option for Margaree. Margaree would be divided. Our voting block would be gerrymandered. That is, it'd be cut in half and split between 2 districts, half in the Shettycamp district, half in the Inverness district, so we would really only have half the voting power. And for issues affecting all of Margaree, we would have to deal with the logistics of dealing with 2 MLAs, possibly from different parties and with different priorities. That would be very challenging. And also putting both sides of the river in competition with each other for resources would harken back to the bad old days when there was animosity between the French and the Gaelic cultures. We don't want to go back there. We are in a really, really good place now. And also, the size of the district is so small that it would probably be open for a court challenge in the future. The third one, Pleasant Bay to and all of the Margarees, and this goes as far west as Dunvegan and south as far as Lake Lalonde. So it would include northeast Margaree, Margaree Centre, etc., Chimney Corner, St. Rose, and Dunvegan. This would make it more likely, but not certain, that an Acadian MLA would be elected. The Francophone percentage would be 36%. So they would be at a disadvantage there. However, Shettycamp has more political connections and organizations than Margaree and Pleasant Bay have. So it would be a bit of a wash. It'd be 50-50 which would be elected, but that would set up a dynamic between the French and the English, the Acadian and the non-Acadians. If an Acadian MLA was elected, it would be raise suspicions among the non-Acadians and vice versa. And also that district would have a voter parity of 0.28, which would be open to a court challenge as well.
From your perspective, having attended these public hearings, do you think there was a broad range of strong submissions for the options suggested by the Commission?
Well, there was a clear choice. The people of Margaree and Pleasant Bay clearly and strongly want to maintain the status quo, and the proponents from Shettycamp clearly and strongly want the Doyle's Bridge option.
The Commission's report will be delivered to Government on January 30, 2026, as I said earlier. Will it be released to the public? When it will be released to the public is unknown. Do you have any advice for the Inverness County residents as to what action they should consider now to ensure their opinions on this important matter are expressed to Government? Perhaps a letter to the Premier, to their MLA. What action do you think should be?
Well, the final report will contain a recommendation and an explanation. So we'll look to see what the recommendation is and see if it's justified. If it's not reasonable, the first thing that we can do is, well, we will discuss it among ourselves using the connections we developed over the summer. And then the first thing that we could do is to launch a letter campaign to Premier Houston. The volume of letters on its own should convince him that Pleasant Bay and Margaree are against the change. However, there are 3 major reasons that we can present to him in these letters for not creating the district. First, there was a lot of procedural problems with the Commission's work that were of the Commission's own doing, that put their findings in question. We've been keeping track of these, and if necessary, we'll make them known at the appropriate time, and hopefully people will use these. We'll point these out in the letters that they would send to the Premier. There are serious conflicts of interest affecting the Commission members that put the validity of the Commission's findings in question. That is, if they have a recommendation that doesn't make sense, this could be a reason for it. We'll make these known if and when necessary. The third thing is the voter parity of 0.2 or 0.28 has no precedent in Nova Scotia, and it would set a precedent in Nova Scotia. That's a very serious issue, and we'll make that known we can make that known in our letters to the Premier as well. The second thing is we need to be engaged in the political process. We should do this anyway. But if a new district is created, the parties will have to select candidates to run in the district. We can join political parties and take part in riding association meetings and vote for candidates that will represent us and not just Shettycamp. And we'll share information on how to do this when appropriate. Off the top of my head, I don't know how to do this, but we'll find out and we'll let people know. The final one is, it sounds like a long shot, but we could sue the government. There's a lot of districts in the province that are oversized, especially in urban areas like Halifax. These places have business interests that would be unhappy about having a new tiny district like this created, and we could probably hopefully convince them to join us and fund our effort. So the report is due on the 30th, a few days from now. We are cautiously optimistic that our recommendation will be for the status quo, but if it isn't, we won't be caught off guard as we were last summer. We'll get together, decide what the best thing is to do, and we'll go ahead and do that.
Well, thank you, Marcel, for that very comprehensive look at what is happening with the process. And our listeners, thank you for going to all that work. I also like to thank our listeners, and hopefully you will hit the like and subscribe button so you can stay up to date. And our quote for today is, be very careful about what you wish for. So long for now, Pat.